The purpose of this workshop is to demonstrate the value of using a digital diagramming interface within IriusRisk to collaborate on threat models with team members versus using maybe a traditional whiteboard approach. So in this workshop, we're going to talk about how we can elevate our whiteboard experience. So first off, when we talk about whiteboarding within IriusRisk, right? Obviously, there are many benefits to using the whiteboard when we're threat modeling. We have that instantaneous collaboration. We have the ability to work and facilitate a process with that group of users. Obviously, we can just visually reach consensus on the way our diagram works, the way it looks, the way our application flows. We have the ability to be single threaded, right? So we're not worried about people necessarily multitasking. Everyone's focused on what we're doing in that moment. And of all those benefits, there are still some native limitations to the use of whiteboards within threat modeling. So obviously, we do have limited space, and if you're bound by just the canvas you're working with on that whiteboard, if you're also one of the people that suffers from poor handwriting or is left-handed, right? You know the pain of trying to diagram and whiteboard accurately, especially on larger, more complex diagrams. We also have a lack of scalability, and that's, whiteboards are primarily designed for physical collaboration, right? So how does that extend when you're working with 50 or 60 team members who are even working remote, or they're collaborating? How do we share that whiteboard space with them and still continue to have them actively participate, contribute, follow on the discussions? Real-time collaboration tools can assist with some of that, but it's still very difficult to do. You also have lack of version control and traceability. So when we talk about how do you version that whiteboard, how do I go back and reference the previous version? Am I taking photos of those things? Is it integrated? How persistent is the documentation? Who's going to own that documentation process? So there are some native limitations to diagramming in that within a whiteboard. But then now, if you compare and contrast that with what does IriusRisk have to offer, now we start adding in, okay, we're an extensible diagramming tool. And what I mean by that is that as you're creating items on that diagram, you have the ability to reach out through API interfaces. That way you can start working with other applications and other data sets outside of IriusRisk. You also have the ability to use the native integrations into issue trackers like Azure DevOps, CA Rally, Jira, ServiceNow integration. So a lot of different integrations that are available that working with just a simple whiteboard wouldn't be available to your team. You also have the ability to execute multiple tasks, right? And the nice thing about this is that your team isn't necessarily the ones executing those. So as you're diagramming with inside of IriusRisk, it's actually going through and looking at all of the different items you have on your canvas, and it's automatically it's using the rules engine to then place threats and countermeasures, and even remove some of those countermeasures and mark some of those as implemented, depending on your environment. So some of those things are already being done just natively based on the context you're providing in your diagram. From a scalability perspective, these things are being stored right there on the canvas, right? This isn't a person-led process. The nice thing about the diagramming interface with IriusRisk is you can either have it based on I can start with an architecture questionnaire, and then as I answer questions, I can start adding items to my diagram. I could automatically import a template so that my team isn't having to re-diagram from scratch. I can also make sure that if I have a very rigid process, that I can forklift that and sustain that into IriusRisk. So if there are 10 pieces of information I need to collect before even the diagramming starts, I can make sure that my architecture questionnaire is already doing that. I can take the facilitator place, so instead of having a security professional maybe leading that whiteboard session, I can start to transition that over to the tool, and now the tool is directing the session which then frees up that person for more, value add conversation. Remote collaboration. You're going to find that since IriusRisk obviously is either SaaS or an on-prem application, users can access it from wherever your security is going to permit them. They don't have to be in the room working with 45 other users. People can be diagramming on the interface at the exact same time, and you can actually see the other user manipulating the diagram. And as they change position on those components, you'll actually see the component move on the diagram. You also have automatic storage. So now there's no longer okay, who's going to record everything on the whiteboard at the end of the session? Everything's already being recorded. It's being saved in real time. And then as the threat model is being updated, it's going to continue to add and subtract different threats. You automatically have version control and traceability, so we know who's making changes. We have the ability to version it, and then it also makes those previous versions immutable, so there's no way to go back and tamper with, did we already threat model this? You also have the ability to be in a borderless world. So unlike the whiteboard where I'm very much limited by the size of my canvas, within the IriusRisk, you have the ability to drill down into items. You've got a very borderless canvas where I can start diagramming, and I can connect multiple diagrams and multiple threat models, and I can create nesting layers of parent and child components. And then also you have the ability to reach consensus. So within IriusRisk, you can actually advance different workflows so that once that diagram is set for this version, I can make that diagram unchangeable. That way I can continue to threat model without necessarily needing to make sure no one's going to make any changes to my diagram. So, that's just a quick contrast between, benefits of whiteboarding versus benefits of a digital whiteboard, if you will, which is going to start integrating into your threat model. So there's no rework being done or transfer of threats. So for this next section, I'd like to go through and just maybe do a quick demonstration of how diagramming within IriusRisk functions. So let's go ahead and jump over into IriusRisk. So here you can see we're starting off on our diagram interface. Now, unlike whiteboarding, I have the ability where I can just automatically deploy different trust zones here. So I can drag and drop. I can add these items on here. And now we're using IriusRisk pre-configured components and trust zones here, but you also have the ability to bring in your own. So if there are some trust zones that you've used and that are pivotal to your organization, you can bring those in. We also have the ability to use kind of a scratch pad here, and this is just a draw.io native item here where I can bring in different items fully formed. So if I want to create certain patterns here, I can start to bring those into my diagram. I have the ability to search very quickly to bring in different types of components. Bring in an EC2 instance. I can also demonstrate that I have different regulatory environments. So if I wanted to demonstrate that I have a cardholder data environment for PCI, I can then take that and nest, different items inside of it. Same thing with GDPR. Excuse me. So yeah, EU GDPR environment. Right, so I can start to visually demonstrate that. And I can make these very complex because I have the ability to minimize this, and I can move around that canvas so that I can have a very large ecosystem within this particular diagram. So not only do I have that ability, but I can also get very granular in here. So if I want to start showing that I have information moving between different areas, I can start assigning different items to these data flows, where I can come in and bring in different kinds of tags. So HTTPS, maybe I'm moving credit card data back and forth, so I can start to add that to my diagram and provide, very granular controls over all of these items inside of here. So, and then you'll see I've got the ability to update my threat model. Now, this is where we talked about it generating multiple different tasks all at the same time. While I'm focused on building my threat model, which is an accurate representation of whatever I'm building, this updating the threat model is going out and it's grabbing all of the relevant threats for these items from my library. So that process of now I have to take my diagram from a whiteboard, I have to translate that into some digital diagram, that's already being done for me. So I don't have to worry about all of these different items. I also have the ability where, let's say, for example, there are certain questions I need to ask about web clients. Well, these items are already being enforced upon the user. So when they come in here to answer these questionnaire, now I don't have to be, quote unquote, the smartest person in the room who's leading this process and say, well, we need to ask these questions anytime we're working with the web client. I can have the application do that for me so that it's going to natively start collecting information about these components. So OAuth 2.0 Superior. What OAuth role is this component? It's going to be the client application. It is the service provider. Go to secret management. And again, we just start answering these questions, and then these are going to start bringing in, different types of risk patterns and things like that are relevant to your particular threat model, right? And as I continue answering these questions and describing my infrastructure, it's going to update, again, provide a prompt here to update my threat model, and that's going to start bringing in sets of threats. So the other nice thing about this, I think I've run this threat model 3 times. As I go down into my artifacts here, I'll be able to see different points of saves on here where I can see what did my diagram look like. And we really didn't have too much of a change between these two states here, but I'll be able to see what my diagram looks like as it goes through time. I can also create a version of that where if I want to say, this is version 1.0, this is the first iteration of this threat model. Emphasis on public-facing services, right? Some kind of brief explanation, and I can create that version. And then now in the background, it's creating a version of this threat model that now I can drill into, and I can actually go in and see what did this look like at this point in time. What does my threat risk distribution look like? What are my countermeasure states? And then I can actually start, okay, so what did the threats look like at this point? So I can actually go in and drill into those threats now. Now, none of these are changeable, right? So I can't go in and edit this information because it's assuming that previous versions are going to be immutable and unchanging. So I can still see, what's my status look like on here. It shows me they're recommended. It's an untracked countermeasure. But it's preserving all of this historic information natively. And then I can go back to my current version, right, which is where I am now. And then I can go in and start working and moving on to the next steps here, which are my threats analysis, right? So again, bringing all of this together so that a team member's not having to move information from that whiteboard and then bring that into some kind of threat management solution, or maybe that's just a spreadsheet in an organization that is just using whiteboarding. But it's bringing all of those different points and values together, so you're only focusing on high value tasks, which are, am I describing my infrastructure accurately? Have I reduced my scope? Is my scope set appropriately? And then assessing which are actionable different types of threats within IriusRisk, right? So that's where we start transitioning from I have to manage a process to, okay, now how do I get to spend more time on the value addition items within my diagram? So we also talked about these being extensible, right? So now I've gone from, I previously had my diagram, I've just moved into threats. Now, if let's say I find this particular threat to be actionable, I can go in and automatically start sending some of my countermeasures directly to my issue tracker, and I haven't had to do any kind of remote data entry. None of that's been done. Of course, I took away from it. So RD201, which then takes me directly into my JIRA so that I can go through and see all this information. And all I've had to do so far is just complete my diagram, answered a couple questions, and now I've gone from my diagram all the way into I have a countermeasure that can be evaluated and worked by a developer, by a security team member. So, just the benefits of, integrating these two things together where Now I've got my diagram integrated with my ability to parse threats and then send those into outside systems. So just the time saving here is immense. So hopefully this workshop has been beneficial and just kind of demonstrating what are some of the key differences between, maybe threat modeling from a whiteboard and taking that diagram and migrating that into something else versus how we can do that inside of IriusRisk, where our diagram is integrated into the threat modeling process and really helps drive and provide some of the relevant context for our threat model. So hopefully this is helpful. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we can set up a time to discuss.